You already know this word, or you think you do. Shalom, peace. You have seen it on a wall hanging. You have heard it at the end of a service. Maybe you have heard the deeper version too, the one that says, Shalom does not mean the absence of conflict. It means wholeness, everything put back together. That is true. But it is not the surprising thing, and it is not why we are here. Because there is a scene in the Hebrew Bible where a king receives a soldier fresh off the battlefield and asks him in Hebrew about the shalom of the war. The shalom of the war. Not whether the war had ended. Not whether there was peace instead of fighting. He asks after the war's shalom while the war is still on. The way you would ask after a sick man's health or a merchant's accounts. And that single strange sentence quietly unravels everything the greeting card told you. Because if you can ask after the shalom of a war, then shalom was never the opposite of conflict. It is something else entirely, something with a harder edge than calm. And by the end of this, you are going to see that in the Bible, this word is not found lying around in quiet rooms. It is forged, it is paid for. The first time God ever hands someone a covenant of shalom, that person has, moments before, driven a spear clean through two people. So no, shalom is not the opposite of calm. Shalom might be the opposite of what you were taught it was. Let me give you the piece everyone gets right first, because it matters and it is real. And then I am going to show you the half that gets left out. Shalom is built on 3 Hebrew letters, Shin, lamed, Mem, the root, Shel-em. And that root does mean to be complete, to be whole, to be finished. You can see it in the plainest possible place, a law about property. In the book of Exodus, when a man's animal destroys his neighbor's field, or a thief takes an ox he cannot give back, the text says, he must shelem, he must pay it back, make full restitution, restore the thing to whole. Same 3 letters. So the popular teaching is correct as far as it goes. Shalom is not a warm feeling, it is the condition of a thing being complete, with nothing missing and nothing owed. Good, hold on to that. But now push one step past where most teachers stop, because the root has a second face. If shalom is the state of a thing being complete and settled, then it is a word about accounts, about how something stands, about whether a matter is squared. And a war has accounts. A war has a state. A war can be going well or badly, settled or wide open. Which is exactly why, in Hebrew, you could walk up to a soldier and ask after the shalom of the battle, and everyone understood you. You were not asking whether the fighting had stopped. You were asking how it stood. Is it settled? Is it whole? Are the accounts of this war in order? Shalom can certainly mean calm and contentment. That sense is real, and the lexicons list it. But in the Hebrew imagination, it is far more than a synonym for quiet. It is the question you ask about the state of any living thing, a person, a household, a city, or an army still in the field. Here is the scene the greeting card never shows you, and it is one of the darkest in the Bible. King David is in his palace, and he has done something that cannot be undone. He has taken another man's wife, Bathsheba, while her husband Uriah is away at the front, and now she is carrying a child. So David sends for Uriah, pulls him off the battlefield, and receives him in the palace. And watch the exact words the text records, because the writer is doing something merciless with them. David asks Uriah, it says, about the shalom of Joab, and the shalom of the people, and the shalom of the war. 3 questions. How is the commander? How are the troops? How stands the war? And every one of them uses this word. David, whose own life has just come apart at the seams, whose accounts with God and with this loyal man are catastrophically not settled, sits there and politely asks after the shalom of everyone and everything except the one account he has broken. It is small talk stretched over a grave, and it tells you something the wall hanging never will. The man asking after all this shalom has none. His rooms are quiet, his palace is calm, no one is shouting, and there is not one whole thing in his life. Because shalom was never about whether the room is quiet. David's room was perfectly quiet. Shalom is about whether the thing underneath has been settled, and David's had not, and no amount of calm on the surface could manufacture it. And watch how far the word bends before the scene is done, because it gets worse. David's whole reason for pulling Uriah home was to get him to sleep in his own house, so the child would look like Uriah's. But Uriah is a better man than his king. He refuses to go home to his wife and his bed, while his fellow soldiers are sleeping in the open field in the middle of a war. It would not be right, he says. So David gets him drunk, and still Uriah will not go. And so the king, who spent an evening asking politely after the shalom of everyone, writes a letter, and he sends Uriah back to the front, carrying it in his own hand. And the letter is the order for Uriah's death, instructions to place him where the fighting is fiercest, and then pull back and leave him to be killed. The man David asked about the shalom of the war is sent back into that war to die by the very king who asked. The word for peace opens the scene, and a murder closes it, and the two are only a few verses apart. If you ever needed proof that biblical shalom is not a soft word, it is here, spoken by a man with none of it, over the head of the man he is about to have killed. That gap, between a quiet life and a settled one, is the whole subject of this word, and it is why the Bible keeps refusing to let shalom mean what we want it to mean. Now the scene I promised you at the start, and I want to warn you. It is violent, and I am going to report it the way the text does, not the way a sermon would soften it. In the book of Numbers, Israel is camped in the wilderness, and a plague is tearing through the camp as a judgment. In the middle of the dying, an Israelite man named Zimri parades a Midianite woman named Cosbi through the camp in open defiance and takes her into a tent in full view of everyone. And a priest named Phinehas, the grandson of Aaron, gets up, takes a spear in his hand, follows the two of them into the tent, and drives the spear through both of them at once. And the text says, the plague stopped. Whatever you make of that scene, and it is a hard one, hold on to what God says next, because it is the part that should stop you cold. God says of Phinehas, I give to him my covenant of shalom, my covenant of peace. The very first time in the Bible that God hands a named individual a personal covenant of shalom. He hands it to a man who has just killed two people with a spear. The peace and the violence are not in different chapters, or even far apart on the page. They sit only a handful of verses from each other, and there is a detail buried in the Hebrew text of that verse that almost no one has ever been shown, and it is the kind of thing that only survives in the manuscript itself. In the traditional Hebrew scribal text, the way this verse has been copied by hand for centuries, the word shalom in my covenant of shalom is written with an oddity. One of its letters, the vav, is written broken or truncated, what the scribes call a vav ketia. That break is genuinely there, preserved copy after copy, in the word for peace, in the one place peace is born from a spear. What it means, though, is exactly the kind of thing I do not want to overstate, because the interpreters do not agree. The Talmud connects the small letter to the wholeness and perpetuity of the priesthood Phinehas is being given. Other readers have taken the broken letter as a hint that this piece is somehow incomplete or cut short. I lean toward hearing a crack in it, a fracture in the very letters of a piece made in blood, but I will be honest that that is my reading, not a caption the text prints for you. The certain part is only this. The scribes left a visible flaw in the word for peace at precisely the moment peace was forged with a weapon, and readers have been puzzling over it ever since. And Phinehas is not the only place the word runs red. Twice more, the Hebrew Bible does something with shalom that should be impossible if the word means calm. It uses it as the cover for a slaughter. In Genesis 34, after the men of the town of Shechem have wronged Jacob's daughter. Jacob's sons answer with a proposal, and the text is blunt that they answered deceitfully. The language of peace sits inside the deal itself. Hamor and Shechem turn to their own townsmen and reassure them that Jacob's family are at peace with us, Shalemim, the very root of shalom. The whole town is talked into a covenant on that promise of peace, and while the men are recovering and defenseless, two of the brothers walk back in and kill them all. The language of peace was the trap. And then, in the book of Judges, there is the story of a woman named Jael. A defeated enemy general, Sisera, flees the battlefield and comes to her tent. And the reason he trusts her is spelled out. There was shalom, the text says, between his king and her household. He lies down under the truce, under the shalom. And while he sleeps, she drives a tent peg through his skull into the ground. In both stories, the word for peace is the last thing the victim hears before the end. Now, I am not holding these up to make the Bible sound bloodthirsty. The writers report these acts, they do not paint them as models, and there is real moral tension in the text about them. But they prove the linguistic point past all argument. A word that can be spoken as a weapon, that can be the truce a man dies under, was never a word that simply meant the fighting had stopped. It meant the state of things between two parties, a state that could be whole, or squared, or, as here, weaponized. Quick breath before the sharpest turn. If the word is opening up for you here, a subscribe does more than you would think, because it carries this to people who have spoken shalom their whole lives and were only ever handed the shrunken version. Now watch what happens when God defines the word himself and sets it in the same breath as disaster. If shalom simply meant the absence of trouble, then there is one sentence in the book of Isaiah that should be impossible, and God says it about himself. In Isaiah 45, God is declaring that he alone runs the universe, that there is no other, and he stacks up the pairs of opposites he holds in his two hands. I form the light, he says, and I create darkness, and then, in the very same breath, the very same grammar, I make shalom, and I create calamity, peace and disaster side by side, both coming from the same hand. Now, the word translated calamity there is ra, and it does not mean moral evil, it means catastrophe, ruin, the disaster that levels a city. So this is not God claiming to author sin, but it is God putting shalom and catastrophe in the same sentence as two things he sovereignly makes, the way he makes light and dark. And stop and feel how strange that is if shalom means calm. You cannot pair calm with catastrophe as two products of the same hand, but you can pair a settling of accounts with a leveling of a city, because both are God putting the world into the state he intends. Shalom here is not the opposite of the disaster in the next clause. It is its twin, made by the same maker. Which means shalom is not the absence of God's hard dealings with the world. Sometimes it is the result of them. And now go back to the most famous shalom phrase in the whole Bible and watch it change in front of you. Isaiah promises a child and gives him a 4-part name that climbs: Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and then the last title, the one everyone quotes on a card in December, Prince of Peace, Sar Shalom in Hebrew. And here is what the soft reading misses. Sar is not a soft word. A Sar is a ruler or commander, an official who holds real authority, and across the Old Testament it very often carries a military sense, a commander with an army at his back. So Sar Shalom is not the gentle prince of quiet feelings. It leans closer to the commander of the settlement, the general whose authority forces the accounts of the whole world back into order, whether the world wants them settled or not. And Isaiah says something else about this commander's shalom that fits the forged reading exactly. Of the increase of his government and his shalom, he says there will be no end. His shalom increases, it advances, it takes ground. Every other empire watches its peace shrink and its borders contract. This one's shalom only expands, like a front line moving forward, because it is not a mood that fades, it is a settlement being enforced across the whole earth. Even the gentlest title in the Bible turns out to be a military one when you read it in Hebrew. The Prince of Peace commands a peace that conquers, and it costs him everything, which is the last and heaviest thing this word carries. A few chapters later, Isaiah describes a servant who is crushed, pierced and wounded, and he says of him a line that most English Bibles soften into sentiment. The chastisement of our shalom was upon him. The word for chastisement means a disciplining, a correction, a punishment borne. Read with the rest of the verse. The settlement that makes us whole did not float down out of a quiet sky. It landed on a body. On this reading, our shalom was purchased, and the bill went to someone else. This is the pattern the whole word has been drawing since the spear in the tent and the broken letter in the scroll. In the Bible, shalom so often has a cost, and so often someone else is the one who pays it. Peace, in the Bible, is not the thing you feel when the trouble is gone. It is the thing that is bought when the account is finally paid, in full, by whoever is willing to cover it. There is one more place this pattern hides, and it is sitting inside a name you have heard 1,000 times. King Solomon. In Hebrew, his name is Shelomo, and it is built on this exact root, Shel-em. He is by name the man of shalom, the man of peace and rest. And the Bible is explicit about why he, and not his father, got to build the temple, the great house where God's presence would settle. David, Solomon's father, wanted to build it, and God told him no. The reason the text says is that David was a man of war who had shed much blood. His son would be a man of rest, and God says of him, "His name shall be Shelomo, and I will give shalom and quiet to Israel in his days." The name and the promise share the one root. Sit with the shape of that. The house of peace is built by the son named Peace, in a settlement God hands him, on the far side of a father's lifetime of war. Now the text is careful about who gets the credit. It is God who gives the rest, not David's sword that earns it. But the sequence is unmistakable, and it is the shape this whole word keeps making. The quiet Solomon builds in arrives only after the blood, one generation of war, standing behind one generation of rest. Peace here is not the mere absence of fighting. It is a settled state that comes on the far side of a long and costly road, which is so often why it is not free and not simply found. Once you see that real shalom always costs something, you can spot the fake instantly, and the prophets did. Jeremiah watched the religious leaders of his day announce peace over a nation that was rotting, and he said they healed the wound of my people lightly, saying, "Peace, peace, when there is no peace. Shalom, shalom, when there is no shalom." It is a devastating line, because it names exactly the thing we do with this word. A false shalom is a clean cloth laid over an open wound. It is the account declared settled when nothing has been paid. It is the quiet in David's palace, while the real matter festers underneath. Anytime anyone tells you everything is fine and nothing has actually been dealt with, you are hearing the counterfeit the prophets condemned, the greeting card shalom with no spear, no price, no broken letter, no cost. It sounds like peace. It is just silence with good manners. And while we are being careful, let me hold one beloved claim up to the light, because honesty means checking the claims we like as hard as the ones we do not. You have probably been told that the name Jerusalem means city of peace, that shalom is hiding right there inside it. It is a lovely idea, and the ending of the name does sound like Shalom, and Jewish tradition has long prayed for the peace of Jerusalem, leaning on exactly that. But honest scholars will tell you the origin of the name is genuinely debated. The older evidence points less to City of Peace and more to a name built around an ancient word for foundation, possibly even tied to the name of a Canaanite deity called Shalom. The Shalom connection may be a later and beautiful association, rather than the original meaning. I am not telling you it is wrong. I am telling you it is not settled, which is a very on-brand thing for the word shalom to be. Report what holds. Flag what is folk memory. Let the real evidence carry the weight. And lest you think this word is only spears and broken letters, let me show you the one place shalom becomes a warm and human thing, because even there, the cost is built right into it. In the book of Leviticus, among all the offerings, there was one whose very name carries our 3 letters, the Shalamim, usually translated the peace offering, the Shalom offering. And it was unlike any other sacrifice because it was the one you got to eat. God received a portion on the altar, the priest received a portion, and then the worshipper and his whole family sat down together and ate the rest, a shared meal, a dinner at the same table with God. It is the most tender picture of shalom in the whole system. Reconciliation you could taste, a relationship whole enough to sit down and break bread over. But do not miss the order of it, because the order is the entire point of this episode. Before anyone ate a bite, the animal was slain. The blood was spilled, the portion was burned, the death came first, and only then, on the far side of that death, did the family sit down to the meal of peace. You did not get the table without the altar. The shared dinner of shalom was real and warm and communal, and it stood on top of something that had to die to make it possible. That is the whole word in one ceremony. Peace you can taste, bought by a death you cannot skip. The greeting card gives you the meal and hides the altar. The Bible always shows you both. Here is what stays with me about shalom, and it is not a quiet room. It is a forge. Watch a blacksmith make a blade, and you will notice the wholeness of that blade, its strength, its single unbroken line, its ability to hold an edge, is not something that was lying around waiting in the calm. It is hammered into the metal, in the fire, under repeated blows, on an anvil. You do not get a whole blade by leaving the iron alone in a quiet drawer. You get it by heat and hammer. That is the truest picture I know of the shalom the Bible actually describes. Not the silence after the fight, the wholeness forged through it. Not the account you never had to settle, the one that was paid at cost and closed. Not the wound covered with a clean cloth, the wound that was actually dealt with, all the way down. So think about the peace you have been asking for and be honest about which one it is, because most of us, when we pray for peace, are asking for the quiet room. Make the noise stop, make the conflict end, make me feel calm, and there is nothing wrong with wanting the room to be quiet. But the word the Bible uses is aiming at something underneath the quiet, and it is a harder and better gift. Shalom asks whether the thing has been settled, not silenced, whether the account has been paid, not just hidden, whether the broken thing has been made whole in the fire, or only covered with a cloth while it keeps bleeding under the bandage. That is why you can have a perfectly quiet life and no shalom at all, the way David did in his calm palace. And it is why you can be in the middle of the loudest season of your life and have shalom anyway, if the account underneath is finally settled. The peace is not in the volume of the room, it is in the state of the thing. And that reframes the peace you are probably chasing in the one place it matters most, which is with other people. Think of the relationship that has gone quiet, the marriage where nobody fights anymore, because nobody talks anymore. The family where an old wound is never mentioned, so everyone calls it fine. The friendship that cooled into politeness. We call that peace because the room is quiet. It is exactly the false shalom Jeremiah named, a clean cloth over a wound that never closed. Real shalom with a person is not the silence where the argument used to be. It is the harder, costlier thing, the conversation nobody wants to have, the debt actually named and forgiven, the apology that gets spoken and the one that gets accepted, the account between two people finally settled instead of just avoided. That kind of peace costs something every time. A swallowed pride, an exposed hurt, a risk that it goes badly. It is forged, not found, which is why the quiet estrangement is so much easier than the loud repair, and why so many of us choose the counterfeit and call it keeping the peace. But the word the Bible uses will not let us keep pretending the silence is the same as the settlement. If this cut the word open for you, write a word or two in the comments so it carries to the next person who only ever got the small version, and share it with someone whose life is very quiet and not at all at peace, because shalom is not calm. You can ask after the shalom of a war. The first covenant of shalom was handed to a man with a bloody spear, and the scribes have kept a crack in the very letter ever since, and the peace God actually offers is not the silence after the trouble. It is the account settled, the wound dealt with, the blade made whole in the fire. So the only question the word really leaves you with is not whether your room has gone quiet tonight. It is the one David could not answer on his calm and beautiful rooftop. Underneath all that quiet, has the thing actually been settled, or has it only been silenced?